The hook and the entire resolution are untouched. I condensed the setup, the auction, the vault sequence, and the confrontation. It lands at roughly 5,000 words. A fist pounded on a door until the hinges rattled. Then a boot slammed it open and fog rolled across the floor. A younger man stormed inside, snatched a checkbook off the table and shoved an old woman back into her chair. She grabbed the armrest to keep from falling. He tore a signed page loose and stuffed it in his coat. Papers scattered. A cat hissed from the corner and vanished under the couch. The old woman said nothing. She just watched her whole life get carried out the door in a manila folder. Her name was Marjorie Vance. She was 68 years old, and in that moment she owned less than the coat on her back. But 3 months later, behind a rusted boiler in a building nobody wanted, she would find something that changed everything. What was sealed behind that door? Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up and tell you how a woman ends up with $6 to her name. Marjorie had worked 41 years, bookkeeping mostly. She kept the ledgers for half the fishing outfits on the Astoria waterfront, and she was good at it. Never late, never a penny out of place. Her husband, Walt, died of a bad heart at 59, and after that it was just Marjorie and the house on Franklin Avenue and their son, Dean. Now here's the thing about Dean. He was charming. That's the word everybody used. Charming. He could talk his way into a job and talk his way right back out of it a month later. By the time he was 40, he'd been through 3 marriages and a dozen business ideas, and every one of them ended with somebody else holding the bill. And Marjorie always paid it. That's what mothers do, she told herself. You bail out your boy. You give him one more chance. She gave him 100 more chances. She refinanced the house twice to cover his debts. She emptied one savings account and started another and emptied that one too. Then Dean did something worse than borrowing. He got smart about it. He showed up one autumn with a lawyer friend and a stack of papers, told his mother she was getting forgetful, told her the house was too much for her, that she'd left the stove on twice, that the neighbors were worried. None of it was true, but he had papers, power of attorney. A signature she gave because he sat at her kitchen table with tears in his eyes and said, "Mom, I just want to protect you." She believed him. Believe me, that's the part that still stings. She believed her own son. Within 6 weeks, he drained every account. The money Walt left her, the pension, the little bit set aside for her funeral. And when the house came up for auction over back taxes Dean never paid on her behalf, he let it go. He'd already gotten what he wanted. The morning he broke down her door and took the last checkbook, Marjorie sat in that chair for 2 hours. Didn't cry. Couldn't. The one-eyed marmalade tomcat came out from under the couch and climbed into her lap, and she just sat there stroking him. That cat was named Dutch. She'd found him half dead behind the fish market 3 winters back, one eye gone, ribs showing. Nobody wanted him. She took him home, and he never left her side again. The 2 of them, both thrown away, both still here. By November, she had nowhere to go. The shelter beds were full. Her friends were mostly dead or in homes of their own. She had 1 suitcase, a cat carrier, and $6 folded in her coat pocket. And that's how Marjorie Vance ended up in the back of a cold county building on a Tuesday morning, at a tax sale nobody else bothered to attend. The county was auctioning off the properties nobody had paid taxes on. Junk mostly. A flooded lot. A collapsed garage. And at the very bottom of the list, 1 derelict building down on Pier 9 that hadn't turned a profit since Kennedy was president. The Cormorant Cannery, a rotting hulk, half the roof caved in, the pilings green with rot. The auctioneer read it out and actually chuckled. Minimum bid, he said, $5 just to cover the paperwork. Anybody? He looked around the near-empty room like he was telling a joke. Marjorie raised her hand. $6, she said. A man in a canvas jacket laughed out loud. You want that fire trap, lady? It's condemned. Going once, the auctioneer said, still grinning. Going twice. Sold to the lady for $6. She signed the deed with a county pen. The clerk, A tired woman named Esther gave Marjorie a long look. "Honey," she said quietly, "that building's going to fall in the river. You got a key at least." And she pressed a rusty ring of keys into Marjorie's hand like she was handing over a sick pet nobody else would take. Marjorie carried her suitcase and her cat down to Pier 9 that same afternoon. The fog was so thick she heard the water before she saw it, and there it stood, her cannery now. 60 feet of gray, sagging timber leaning out over the river on legs that groaned in the wind. She let herself in. The door screamed on its hinges. Inside it smelled of salt and rust and 80 years of dead fish, rows of gutting tables. And at the far end, huge and black, a boiler the size of a truck, streaked orange with rust. It was the loneliest place she'd ever stood in. But it had a roof over most of it, and it was hers, and for the first time in months nobody could take it away. She opened the carrier. Dutch stepped out, sniffed the air once, and shot across the whole length of that cannery like a bolt of orange lightning, straight to the base of the boiler. He put his one good eye to a gap at the bottom of it and started to cry. Not a meow, a cry. Marjorie laughed for the first time in weeks. "Well," she said, "guess we're home." She didn't know it yet, but that cat had just walked straight to the one thing in Astoria worth more than everything her son had stolen. That first night, Marjorie made a bed out of moving blankets near the old office in the corner, where the wind didn't cut so hard. She found a wood stove that still drew and burned scrap crate lumber to keep from freezing. She had a can of beans and a heel of bread. She fed half the beans to Dutch, and she sat there in the firelight thinking, "This is it, Marjorie. This is what 41 years of honest work buys you. A rotting box on the water and a one-eyed cat." She wasn't angry. She was past angry. She was just tired all the way down to the bone. But Dutch wouldn't let her rest. All night long, that cat kept going back to the boiler, scratching, digging at the base of it with both paws like he was trying to tunnel through steel. She'd call him back, he'd come, curl up, and 10 minutes later he'd be at it again. Scratch, 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 and that low crying sound. Mice, she figured. She'd deal with it in the morning, but it wasn't mice. Because the same thing happened the next night, and the night after that. Every single night, Dutch went to the base of that rusted boiler and dug like his life depended on it. By the fourth night, Marjorie had started to fix up the place a little out of pure stubbornness. She swept. She patched a window with a board. She met a couple of the locals. There was Sal, who ran the marine hardware store 2 piers down, a big gruff man who took one look at her situation and started leaving cans of soup on her doorstep without a word. And there was Esther, who came by on her lunch break just to make sure the old woman hadn't frozen to death. They both told her the same thing. Nobody had set foot in the Cormorant in 40 years. The last owner was an old Norwegian named Nils Halvorsen, and after he died back in the 60s, the place just sat, tied up in liens and back taxes so deep nobody would touch it, until a broke old woman with $6 came along. On the 5th night, Marjorie couldn't take the crying anymore. She got up, wrapped herself in a blanket, took her flashlight, and got down on her knees in front of the boiler. "I don't know what you want," she told the cat, "but let's have a look." She swept the light along the base. The boiler sat on a low brick platform, shoved back against the far wall a long time ago. She pushed her arm into the gap and felt cold air moving. That was strange. Cold air coming from behind a wall. She got Sal's help the next day. He brought a chain hoist, and the two of them spent an entire afternoon dragging that boiler 18 inches forward on its rusted skids, both of them soaked in sweat in the freezing cold, Dutch pacing the whole time. And when they finally got it clear, Marjorie shined her light on the wall behind it, and both of them went quiet. It wasn't a wall at all. It was a door. A steel door set into the brick, thick as a bank vault, and it had been welded shut. You could still see the seam where somebody had run a torch all the way around the edge and fused it solid, sealed, deliberately. by hand, and there, stamped into the steel just above the handle in raised iron numbers, was a year, 1961. Sal took off his cap and stared. "In 40 years working these piers," he said slowly, "I never once heard about no vault in the Cormorant. What in God's name did that old man weld shut?" Marjorie ran her fingers over the numbers. She felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope exactly, curiosity. The feeling that a story wasn't finished. "We're getting it open," she said. It took 3 days to find someone with a torch who'd work cheap, and most of Sal's spare oxygen and acetylene to do it. The old weld was tough and the steel was thick, and twice they had to stop because the smoke got too heavy in that closed space. Dutch sat on a gutting table the whole time, watching, his one eye reflecting the blue flame. By the third evening, they'd cut through 3 sides of the door. The metal hung there on its last hinge. Sal wedged a pry bar into the gap and leaned on it with all his weight. The steel groaned. Then it gave all at once and swung inward with a shriek that echoed the length of the cannery, and a breath of stale, sealed air rolled out into their faces. 40 years of trapped air, cold and dry and dead. Marjorie lifted her flashlight to the black opening, and her heart sank, because from where she stood it looked like nothing. Just a small dark room, maybe 8 feet square, thick with dust, a shape or two under old canvas. No gold, no treasure, just an old storeroom some lonely man had bricked up for reasons that died with him. She sat down hard on an overturned crate. Sal handed her a thermos and she took a long drink of lukewarm coffee, and the two of them just sat there in the quiet. "Well," she said, and let out a long breath, "all that, and it's probably just his old paperwork. Some sad man's junk." Sal chuckled tiredly and screwed the cap back on the thermos. "Probably right," he said. "Folks seal things up for all kinds of foolish reasons." He stood, reached for his coat. "Get some sleep, Marjorie. Look at it in the morning when you got daylight and 2 good hands." She nodded. She was too exhausted to argue. She'd chased a cat's cry into a welded vault and found a dusty closet. That was about right for the way her whole life had gone. She patted her lap and Dutch hopped up, purring now, finally calm, like whatever he'd been trying to tell her had finally been said. The danger, whatever it was, felt over. The building creaked. The river slapped the pilings. Marjorie closed her eyes. That's when headlights swept across the cannery wall. 2 beams cut through the fog and pinned the whole rotten interior in white light. A car door slammed, then another, and a voice she would have known anywhere came drifting up the pier, smooth and easy and false. "Mom. You in there? It's Dean. I heard you bought yourself a little project." Marjorie's blood went cold, because her son had not driven 3 hours through the fog to check on her health. Dean walked in like he owned the place, and behind him came a second man, tall, in an expensive gray coat, carrying a leather folder. Not a lawyer this time. Marjorie could read a man's occupation off his shoes, and these shoes said money. Real money. Dean spread his arms and grinned. "Look at this place," he said, wrinkling his nose at the smell. "My mother, the property tycoon." He looked at the boiler shoved out of place, at the cut-open vault, at his mother's exhausted face, and something flickered behind his eyes. Interest. The man in the gray coat offered a business card Marjorie didn't take. "Mrs. Vance," he said. "Harlan Price. Price Coastal Development." He looked around the cannery the way a butcher looks at a cow. "Your son tells me you recently came into possession of this parcel. And here it was. Here's the part that changed everything. It turned out the Cormorant Cannery wasn't just a rotting box on the water. It was the last privately held deepwater frontage in the whole harbor. Price had spent 2 years buying up every pier around it to build a resort marina, and this one lot, this $6 lot, sat dead in the center of his plans. Without it, the whole project was worthless. With it, he stood to make $40 million. And Dean, my God, Dean had found out. He tracked his mother down not to help her, but because he'd heard through a county contact that the old woman he'd robbed had accidentally bought the one piece of land a developer would pay a fortune for. Price named a number. $300,000 cash for the deed, tonight. Now stop and think about what that meant to a woman with $6. $300,000. It was everything. A house, a future, safety for the rest of her days. But then Dean spoke and the trap closed. "There's a problem with that, Mr. Price," he said smoothly, pulling a folded paper from the same coat he'd stuffed her signature into 3 months before. "See, my mother's not really competent to sign contracts anymore. I hold power of attorney. Any sale goes through me." He turned to his mother with that charming, terrible smile. "Don't worry, Mom," he said. "I'll handle everything, same as always." And there it was. He was going to steal it right in front of her. The house, the savings, and now this. He'd sell her land, pocket the money, and leave her exactly where he'd left her before, in an empty room with a cat. Marjorie stood up. Her knees screamed and she didn't care. "Get out," she said. "Both of you. Get off my property." Price raised an eyebrow. Dean laughed, actually laughed. "Mom, be reasonable. This place is condemned. You can't even prove you own it clean. There's 40 years of liens on it. Sign with me tonight or the county takes it back for the taxes and you get nothing." He held out the pen. Nothing at all. And you know what? He was right about one thing. She was tired and old and broke, and standing there in the cold, she felt every one of her 68 years pressing down on her. But she looked at that welded vault, that door some other betrayed old soul had sealed with his own 2 hands, and something in her refused to bend. "I'm not signing anything tonight," she said. "I need a week. A woman my age is allowed to think." Dean's smile dropped. Price checked his watch and said he'd give her 72 hours, no more, and then he'd move his marina somewhere else and she'd have missed the only offer she'd ever get. The two of them walked out into the fog. But at the door, Dean turned back and the charm was gone from his face entirely. "Don't be stupid, Mom," he said quietly. "That paper's already signed. You just don't remember signing it." And he was gone. Marjorie stood alone in the dark with her heart hammering. Because she understood exactly what he meant. He was going to forge her or claim she was senile and take it all anyway. She had 72 hours and no money and no lawyer and a rotting building she couldn't prove was clean. Now, before we go on, if this old woman's fight is getting to you the way it's getting to me, do me one favor. Hit that subscribe button. Stories like Marjorie's, the ones about ordinary people who get pushed too far and don't break, we only keep telling them if you're here for them. So stay with me. Because what she found behind that door is about to turn this whole thing upside down. Marjorie didn't sleep that night. She sat by the wood stove until her hands stopped shaking, and then, a little after 2 in the morning, she picked up her flashlight and Dutch, and she walked back to the open vault. If she was going to lose it all again, she was at least going to see what that lonely man had cared enough to seal away. She ducked through the warped steel door. Inside, the little room was dry as bone. Her light fell first on a wooden desk and a chair pushed back from it like whoever sat there had just stood up and walked out. A coffee cup on the desk, a fountain pen, a pipe in a glass tray, everything exactly where a man had left it. And on the desk, weighted down under a smooth gray river stone, was a letter. The paper had gone brown at the edges, but the ink held. It was written in a careful, old-fashioned hand, and it was dated the 4th of March, 1961. Marjorie sat down in the dead man's chair and read it out loud in the dark, her voice small in that sealed room. "To whoever opens this door," it began. "My name is Nils Halvorsen. I built this cannery with my wife Ingrid in 1927, and for 30 years it was a good and honest place. Ingrid died in the winter of 1958, and after that I had only my son, Eric, and this business and a foolish old cat named Sailor who lost an eye to a gull and never left my side." Marjorie's breath caught. She looked down at Dutch, curled at her feet, his one eye gleaming. She kept reading. "My son Eric has decided I am too old to run what I built. He has been to the lawyers. He has emptied the accounts I trusted him to keep. Last week he tried to have the doctors sign a paper saying my mind is gone. My mind is not gone. My heart is only broken. A man raises a boy and the boy grows into a hand that takes." The words swam in front of Marjorie's eyes. 60 years apart, and he was writing her life, word for word. A boy who grew into a hand that takes. "I am an old man and I will not fight him in a courtroom I cannot win," the letter went on. "But I will not let him have what I saved either. Everything I have left in this world I have put behind this door, and I have sealed it with my own torch. Not out of spite, out of hope. I am giving it to whoever comes after me. Whoever finds this place at the end of their rope, the way I have found the end of mine. If you have opened this door, then you are that person. You came here with nothing, or you would not have come to a ruin like this at all. So it is yours, all of it. You earned it the same way I earned my grief, by surviving what family did to you." There were instructions, and then at the bottom one last line that broke Marjorie clean in half. "Be kind to whatever cat greets you here. In my experience, they know an honest heart before we do." Marjorie put the letter down and wept, not from sadness, from something she didn't have a word for. 40 years that room had waited, 40 years for exactly her. Then she lifted the flashlight and looked at what Nils Halvorsen had left behind, and her hands began to shake all over again. Along the back wall stood a heavy iron safe, its door standing open. And inside, stacked in neat canvas bank bags, were silver dollars, hundreds of them. Rolls and rolls of silver from a time when silver was money. Beside them, in a wooden cigar box, gold coins, double eagles wrapped in oilcloth, and a thick folder of United States savings bonds, war bonds bought in the 40s and never cashed, sitting quietly all these decades gathering interest. But that wasn't the thing that mattered most. On top of the safe, in a flat metal document box, was the original deed to the Cormorant Cannery, and every foot of waterfront it stood on, free and clear. And beneath it a second document, notarized and stamped, that Nils Halvorsen had drawn up in 1961. A declaration. It stated that the contents of this room and the property itself passed in full and without condition to whatever person legally held title to the cannery. Not to his heirs, to the title holder. He had made sure Eric could never touch it, not in 100 years. And Marjorie Vance held that title. She had bought it, clean and legal, with $6 and a county pen in front of witnesses at public auction. She sat in that chair until the gray light of morning began to leak through the cannery boards. And by the time the sun came up, she understood something Dean did not. She wasn't broke anymore, and she wasn't helpless. She had a deed free of every lien because the old man's box held the paid receipts too. She had a fortune in metal and bonds, and she had the one thing that would end her son for good. She got to work. She didn't call a lawyer that morning. She called Esther at the county, and she called Sal, and she asked them a very careful set of questions. She was a bookkeeper, remember. She'd spent 41 years reading the fine print other people skipped, and by noon she understood her position completely. When Dean came back the next evening, he came alone, and he came confident. He walked into the cannery with a stack of papers and that easy grin, expecting a defeated old woman ready to sign whatever he put in front of her. Instead, he found his mother sitting behind Nils Halvorsen's desk, which she'd hauled out into the middle of the floor. It was covered in documents, all in neat piles, the way she used to keep the books. Sal stood by the wall with his arms crossed. And in a chair off to the side sat a woman Dean didn't recognize, an attorney from Portland named Ruth Calloway, who Sal knew and who'd driven down as a favor when she heard the story. Dean stopped. Something's different, he thought. You could see it cross his face. "Sit down, Dean," Marjorie said. She didn't raise her voice. She never raised her voice. "Sit down, because I'm only going to explain this once and then you're going to leave and you're never going to come back." He sat, force of habit. He'd always done what his mother said, right up until the day he decided to rob her. "I know about the power of attorney," she said. "I've had it reviewed. It was obtained through fraud and it named you my agent under false claims about my mind. Mrs. Calloway has already filed to revoke it. That's finished." She slid a paper across the desk, and there's this, a police report. "About the morning you broke my door and took my checkbook. Sal witnessed the door. My neighbor witnessed you carrying the folder. Theft and elder financial abuse, Dean. Those are felonies in the state of Oregon." The color drained out of his face. "Now here's the part I want you to really hear," she went on, folding her hands. "This building you came to steal, it's mine, free and clear. Every lien on it was paid in 1961 and I have the receipts. So there's no county taking it back. Your Mr. Price can deal with me directly, and he will, because I'm going to sell him the frontage on my terms for a great deal more than $300,000. Dean opened his mouth. "Mom, listen, I can explain. I was going to split it with you, I swear. I was always going to take care of you." And that right there was the last lie he ever told her. Marjorie stood up. She walked around the desk and she stopped in front of her son, the boy she'd laid out 100 times, the man who'd left her with $6 and a cat. "I raised you," she said quietly. "I gave you everything I had twice over, and you grew into a hand that takes." She picked up Nils Halvorson's letter from the desk. "A man I never met wrote those words 60 years ago about his own son, and he sealed his whole life behind a steel wall rather than let that son have it." She looked Dean dead in the eye. "I understand him now. I understand him completely." She set one last document in front of him. It was signed and it was witnessed, and it was Marjorie's new will. "You're not in it," she said. "Not a dollar. Everything I have, everything that old man left me, goes to a trust for old people in this town who got thrown away by their families. Like he was, like I was." She stepped back. "Now get out of my cannery." Dean looked around the room, at the lawyer, at Sal's crossed arms, at the police report on the desk, and he understood, finally, that there was nothing left to take. He stood up on shaking legs. For 1 second the charm tried to come back to his face, that old smile that had opened 100 doors and emptied 100 pockets. It found nothing to land on. His mother just looked at him, calm and clear-eyed, the way you look at a stranger, and that, more than any of it, was what finally broke him. He turned and walked out into the fog without another word. She heard his car start. She heard it drive away, and she never saw her son again. The charges went through. Dean took a plea to avoid prison, but the record followed him, and a man who lives by charm can't work when everyone's read the report. Price turned out to be a decent enough businessman once he was dealing with someone who couldn't be pushed around. Marjorie sold him the water frontage she didn't need. She kept the cannery building itself, and the pier it stood on, and she got $740,000 for the rest. But you know what? The money was never really the thing. Let me tell you what she did with it. She didn't buy back the house on Franklin Avenue. She said that house belonged to the old Marjorie, the one who kept saying yes to a boy who kept saying take. Instead, she fixed up the cormorant. New roof, new pilings, new windows that let the gray harbor light pour in. And she turned it into something. She called it Halvorson House. A place where the old people of Astoria who'd been pushed out, robbed, forgotten, abandoned by the families that were supposed to love them, could come and sit by a warm stove and drink coffee and be treated like they mattered. She hired Esther when the county laid her off. Sal built every table in the place with his own hands and wouldn't take a dime. On the wall by the door, framed, hung Nils Halvorson's letter so everyone who walked in could read it. "To whoever opens this door." And the old iron safe, she left it right where it was, empty now, its door open. A reminder that sometimes the thing that saves you has been waiting in the dark for 40 years, patient as an old cat, for you to finally come and find it. Marjorie lived another 11 years. Good years. Full ones. She was never rich the way Price was rich, because she gave most of it away, but she never wanted for anything again, and she never once ate alone. On winter evenings, you could find her in the corner of Havorson House by the wood stove, a blanket over her knees, going over the books, because a bookkeeper is a bookkeeper to the end. And on her lap, purring, one gold eye half closed, slept a one-eyed marmalade tomcat named Dutch, the cat that got thrown away, the cat that walked straight across a rotting cannery on his first night and cried at the base of a rusted boiler night after night, until an old woman who had nothing left finally got down on her knees and listened. Nils was right, you know. In the letter, they do know an honest heart before we do. Marjorie used to say that the day her son broke her door and took her last dollar was the day she thought her life was over. A younger man, a signature stolen, a whole life carried out the door in a manila folder. She really believed that was the end. Turns out it was just the part before a door that had been sealed since 1961 finally swung open. And on the other side of it, an old man she never met was waiting to give a thrown-away woman everything her own family stole, and something they never could, which was this. Somebody, finally, saw her worth, even if he'd been dead for 40 years to do it.